But which one do you get? Do you get the Grom, do you get the Grom clone, or do you get the Z125? I did a video a little while back about the Grom versus the Grom clone. I'll link that above. But people have asked me in that video, what about the Z125? You have a Z125. Why did you get that over the Grom? Let's talk about that. At first glance, the Z125 and the Grom are very similar bikes. They're similar in stature, they're similar in style. The older Groms had a dual headlight, which made it look a little bit like a transformer. The newer Groms look a little bit different. It depends on what you're looking for. You might like the Z125 over the Grom just based off of aesthetics. Maybe you're a Kawasaki guy. Look at my green garage. I'm a Kawasaki guy. I tend to lean towards the Z125 because of that. But other things that you look at on paper, like the horsepower ratings, the top speed, the ergonomics of the bike, the actual build quality of the bike, those are things that are going to be a little bit different between the two. So let's talk about those two. One big reason that a lot of people buy these small bikes is the fuel mileage. You get fantastic distance out of these bikes. Now the Z125 has a slightly larger gas tank than the Grom does. The Z125 tank is 2 gallons versus the Grom, which is a little bit over 1.5 gallons. When you're talking about half gallon, it's not going to make or break whether or not you buy the bike, but it's something worth noting. Definitely need to comment when talking about this Grom. This Grom is not OEM. It is not from the factory. We've got an aftermarket body fairing on. We've got aftermarket solid mounted pegs, aftermarket exhaust, whole wheelie bar is set up, and there's also an even aftermarket seat on there that raises the seat height a bit too. The guy who owns this bike is about 6'1" or 6'2", so he wanted to raise that up and make it more comfortable for him. He's also got different bars on it, setting up different ergonomics, so just want to call that out that this is not a factory Grom. Price points, you're very, very similar. If you're looking at a new one, you're looking at about $3,400 plus tax, tag, title fees, all that jazz. If you're looking at used bikes, the Grom tends to carry some more value. There's a lot more resale value in a Grom than there is the Z125. I think that's just dependent on the market too. But those Groms, they've been doing the small bikes for a long time. People trust the small Hondas. There's a couple major differences between the Z125 and the Grom when it comes to mechanics too. Two of the most important things would be that there is an oil filter in the Z125 engine. The Grom has what's called an oil spinner. So there is a way of cleaning out the oil and you have to wipe it out and you change it. Not everybody does that every time they change the oil. That is a huge reason I went with the Z125. I like having a removable filter. Now that complaint is only relevant to the older Groms. After 2022, Honda put an oil filter in. They took that complaint, they made some changes, they made improvements. I haven't ridden the newer one, but I think it's gonna ride about the same as this 2020, but it's got some minor adjustments like that. The second other big difference is the fact that you've got a dual piston caliper in the front on the Grom and a single piston caliper on the front of the Z125. So you've got better braking power out of the Grom than you do the Z125. Those are things that you can change, but to be truthful, these bikes are small enough and the speeds are low enough that the dual piston versus single piston isn't going to make a huge difference to you unless you're racing it. It's just something worth noting because I know a lot of people prefer that dual piston for consistent stopping power. Now, if you're like me and you like to set up your suspension based off of your weight and riding style, the Grom is something that you can't quite do that on. The rear spring from the factory is not adjustable. You can't adjust the preload, compression, or anything else. So it's just a stationary shock. It is center mounted though. On the Z125, however, you actually have the ability to change the preload. So that'll help with any additional sag. If you're a larger guy or a smaller person riding on this bike, you can increase the preload, which will decrease the amount of sag when you first get on the bike. Rather than me talking about the stats on paper and just spitting out numbers to you, how about I throw them up on the screen as I go for a ride and talk about how I like each one of them from a rider's perspective. Let's get on the road, get out there, and have some fun. All right, so check this out. This battery is dead. It does not want to crank. One cool thing about these really small bikes, I can put it into gear, take just a few steps, and then pop start the clutch. You can do that on a bigger bike, but it takes a lot more steps and a lot more effort for sure. So the ability to do that by yourself in just like 5 steps is really cool. There's nothing wrong with this bike, it's just we don't ride it as much as we should, so the battery dies. Don't judge me or call me a squid. I am riding in shorts and a t-shirt right now, but I am staying inside the neighborhood, and it's like 100 degrees outside. So I'm just riding to get this filming for you. People ask questions. They want to know answers of why did I buy a Z125 instead of the Grom. So the story is, I had a bunch of friends who all bought Groms, and they wanted to go to Deal's Gap, the infamous dragon, the tail of the dragon up in North Carolina. And I'm a Kawasaki guy. I love Kawasaki's, and they're like, go get a Grom, go get a Grom. And I said, I'll go with you, but I'm not gonna buy a Grom. I'll buy a Z125 instead. They're like, oh, why? Realistically, it came down to styling. I preferred the style of the Z125 to the Grom for a few things, and I'll talk about that when I'm on the Z itself. But there's nothing wrong with this bike. This is a fantastic learning bike. As I mentioned, I'll throw some of the stats up on the screen, talking about horsepower, weight, seat height, all that stuff. But most importantly on this bike, I want to call out some things. Honda makes a very reliable engine. And I mentioned before that there's not an oil filter in the older versions of the Groms. To me, that's a bit sketchy. I like the ability to say, there's something cleaning my oil that I can remove and replace to keep it as clean as possible. So the oil filter was a detractor for me on the Grom. But the engine itself is a fantastic engine. It's a 4-speed transmission. It shifts really, really well. It shifts just like it should. The Honda Grom, one of the biggest reasons that you would buy a Grom over a Z125, aside from the aesthetics and just liking Honda versus Kawasaki, that's up to you. The aftermarket support for the Grom is amazing. You could buy every conceptual piece of bike for the Grom. You can get gearing, you can get suspension, you can get engine work, you can get body work like on this one. There's no end to what you can put onto a Grom and make it even more customized. You can even get graphics kits pretty easily for these too. They are one of the top choices for stunt bikes for people too, because they wheelie really well. Like this one has a short clutch lever on it. It's got the full sub cage, the wheelie bar and everything. You won't see me wheeling it, but it's a great wheelie bike if that's your kind of thing. With the lower seat height, if you're a new rider, this is one of the lowest seat heights that you can get. The Z125 does sit a little bit higher up. If you have short legs or if you're just not confident on the bike itself, this is a great place to start, because you can put your feet down anytime you need to at a stoplight or a stop sign, even if you're on a curb. Like you see how there's these rain gutters here on these curbs in Texas. I've known people that get to that spot of their driveway and they can't touch the ground, and they just kind of pedal their feet until they fall down, and that's not a good feeling to just drop your bike when it's turned off. Ooh, free stuff. The throttle's very responsive. This is a fuel injected engine, but when you get on the gas, it's not going to throw you back in your seat. It's not going to do a power wheelie. You have to clutch these up if you really want to do a wheelie. So again, as a beginner, if you're just riding around and you stomp on it, it's not going to throw you back. It's not going to make you whiskey throttle. It's going to be, again, a smooth, easy to ride bike. All right, let's head back to the house, swap bikes for the Z, and go play around on that for a little bit. Not that it's a competition, but let's see if the Z125 starts. Oh yeah. So I love the analog tachometer right there. I love that you've got an actual needle. I love that you've got a red line. You've got a fun zone. There's a gear selector, or gear indicator I should say. I actually like the dash of the Z substantially more than on the Grom. I don't feel like it has any less stopping power with that single piston front end. doesn't have any less power. It's pretty comparable. I'll throw some stats up on the screen on the side here that talk about the horsepower, the torque, the weight, the seat height, all that. Now, I did mention that the seat height on this bike is higher than that of the Grom, and that was one of the reasons I chose it. Was I feel like it fits me a bit better. I'm 6 feet tall, and I didn't want to have to modify the bike so that I could ride it better. Now, one thing I said about the Grom, and that was a huge reason that people would buy a Grom over the Z, is the aftermarket support. You can buy anything you want for the Grom. The Z has some aftermarket support, but it's not nearly as strong as the Grom is. This isn't a bike that gets commonly stunted out. It does happen, people do it all the time, but it's not like the go-to of mini stunt bikes. The Grom is. Now, what I do see more people doing on the Z125 is taking it to the kart track to do mini-moto. I don't know that there's a reason for it. It's not like this has much of a difference in suspension. I did mention that rear shock preload adjustment. That helps with, you know, squatting under power. But again, there's not a whole lot of power to this bike. You could take this bike in its current trim and take it to the racetrack and just go have fun with it. Now, one reason might be the fact that this has a smaller front tire. It's not as wide of a tire on the front as the Grom is. My neighbors must think I'm crazy, riding around the neighborhood talking to myself. Alright, so I said the styling was a huge reason why I got the Z. You've also seen my garage. If you've watched my channel, you know I'm a die-hard Kawasaki guy. My garage itself is green. One of the coolest style features on this bike is the tail light. The tail light itself actually has a Z in it. I'll try to flash it up on the screen with the light on. There's a forward Z and a backward Z, and that's something that the other Z series have, like the Z650, the Z800, the Z900. That's just been a thing for the Zs. And right before I bought this, I had a Z1000, and that was probably one of my favorite bikes I've ever owned, and I wish I had never sold it. And this is like a mini version of that. It's like its little cousin. Now, this does have a 4-speed transmission. This is fuel injected just like the Grom is, so there's no real difference in that. Now, I did do a drag race with a buddy of mine. When I say drag race, I mean we were going down the highway just to see who could get the highest top speed, and I had edged him out by just a little bit. I think I topped at like 65 and he topped at like 62. Factory gearing, but he was also a bigger guy. He's probably like 220, 230, and I'm like 130. So big difference in weight. Yeah, I'm not surprised that I took him in that type of a race. This bike really does do everything you could possibly want it to do. With that higher seat height, it's good for people who want a small bike that are actually full-size adults. My wife, however, she's only about 5'1". When she gets on this bike, she can totally flat-foot it, but it's not like it's a small bike for her. This bike is like a regular size bike, and she used to ride a ZX6 that I had to lower about 3 inches. This is a perfect size for her. So who wants me to take this bike to the go-kart track and see if I can drag knee on it? I'm pretty sure I could, but it's been years since I've done that. Tell you what, if I get enough people who comment, take it to the track, I will take this bike to the track, and I will do my absolute best to get my knee on the ground on a Z125 in my first day on the track in, like, I don't know what, 10 years. So comment below that you want to see this bike at the track. Tell me why you like the Z. Tell me why you like the Grom. I want to know your opinions, and I want to know if you agree with me that the biggest difference is the style between these bikes, and that's what would make you buy one over the other. Let me know. Ooh, there's nails on the ground. I'm gonna go pick those up. I'm gonna save somebody's tire. That's lovely. Let's see, where can I throw it so it'll be safe from lawnmowers too? All right, let's go in the woods. Down there. Yeah. Bang. All right, third gear. Love it. So much power. So I guess in conclusion, I bought the Z125 because I like the looks of it. I like the feel of it. And I didn't necessarily want to throw money at customizing it. I didn't want to go and do all those extra things that you can do on the Grom that you can't on the Z. So I chose the Z. I also want to add, I mentioned this before too, the Z125 doesn't hold its resale value as high as the Grom does. So if you're going to look for a used one, there is a very good possibility you can save yourself hundreds of dollars by getting a Z125. If I were to be just looking at websites and reading articles and stats between which bike to get, the Grom or Z125, I'd probably actually go with the Grom. I think on paper, the aftermarket abilities for that bike, I think the braking power, there's a lot of things that lend its direction towards the Grom. So if you're looking for a bike, keep that at the top of your list. But the Z125, although it doesn't necessarily win on paper, it's much more my style. So I went with the Z125 because of the looks, because of the feel, and it just seems like a better buy for me. And I got to save some money in the process too. So keep those things in mind when you're looking at these bikes. Hopefully you can make a right decision for you, but either way, have fun, stay safe out there, and ride some more.